don't know if you believe in karma, but we seem to have a lot of karma at Maple, the monastic academy. And it's car karma. On one day last week, I believe we have 8 vehicles there, and 6 of the 8 broke down on one day. And then, a few days later, my father's truck, sister's car, and her husband's car all broke down. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but today my car wouldn't start. So that's why I'm a little late, but I made it. And that has nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with the subject of today's talk. This is going to be the third and I suppose final segment on romantic relationships, and maybe the last talk on the relationship series. The significant time given to this is justified by the great interest in the topic. Since starting this, correct me if I'm wrong, but since starting this, the total number of views or listens on the web page to these talks it's increased by about 75%. That's amazing. So there's a lot of interest in this, and it's something worth talking about. Today I'd like to make use of some of the comments from last week that Jay made. This is Jay right here. And I was very interested in some of the comments that he made, and so we've spoken since then about his views, his perspectives, and I want to share some of that with you. We, in recent centuries, we have elevated romantic love quite a bit. It's common, as I've said many times, and I think it's worth saying again and again. It's common in many world cultures, including the base of our own. The philosopher Plato had this view as well, that romantic love is a kind of mental illness. It's a problem that as you mature, you will overcome. And gradually, you won't experience it anymore. And then you can experience true love. But children, teenagers, and such, they still experience romantic love, and that's okay as long as you train them in how to overcome it. We no longer believe that in our culture anyway, and in fact, we've elevated it beyond merely acceptable, actually to a kind of sacred experience. There's the sense that it's perhaps the purpose of life, and it will solve your problems. It will make you happy. It will give you purpose, and this person who you find will resolve the issues that you have brought into the relationship and show you the way to your fulfillment of your potential. So we have dramatically changed our perspective on romantic love. And now it's taken to the next level when it's used to market other things. Not only do we market it, but it now markets other things. You see it in commercials and such, that if you get this thing, then you will have romantic love. And it's just then assumed that therefore you'll have fulfillment. What does that mean? What is this saying? And what does it imply about how we should conduct our romantic relationships? I think a lot of what it says is actually that we don't have all that many connections anymore. Look at studies that compare the number of close friends we have nowadays to the number of close friends we've, in this particular country, had in past decades, and that number just keeps on going down. In particular, if you ask people a very important question, how many people are there in your life who you could call on when you're in crisis? How many people do you know? And when you're really having trouble, when you're not doing well, how many people could you call at that time and they would help you? That number has consistently declined for 60 years now. Until now, many of us, I think, don't have anyone like that. It's quite frightening. And so it's natural that we would want to put all our eggs in one basket because we don't have any baskets. So one is better. Of course, I'm very proud of our community here because this community can help us to resolve that problem. I hope that we here have the ability to meet others for whom we would be available if they were in crisis and on whom we could depend if we end up being in crisis. But it's had implications on how we view romantic relationships as well. Our sense that romantic relationships are sacred, are the purpose of life, has made us associate romantic love with God, with nirvana, with enlightenment. And there's a certain quality of those concepts, if those are concepts, there's something that we associate with them which is very wise and true, which we should associate with those things. And that is that God, enlightenment, nirvana, these things are not created. It's important to see that. It's true. It's actually true. We're wise in knowing this. Nirvana is not created. It doesn't come into being and it doesn't stop being. Same with God. God wasn't created and God won't be destroyed. God doesn't come into existence and doesn't leave existence. God doesn't exist or not exist. Nirvana doesn't exist or not exist. And there's nothing you can do about any of that. You can't change nirvana. Nirvana doesn't change. You can't do anything about it. You can't make it, and you can't get rid of it. It's good that we know that the ultimate purpose of life is uncreated. It's good that we know that the supreme significance of this path is the direct realization of that which is not born, that which does not die. It's very good that we know that. What is confusing for us is when we start associating things that are not that with that. When we think that things are that are not that. And when we associate romantic love with the purpose of life, we can't help but start to think that it also is uncreated and undestroyed. That it's not something, which to use Jay's word, that we build. And actually, when we start to think about it as something that we build, it loses its sacred significance. Because we realize, oh, well, I made it. I mean, there's nothing magical about that. I made it. I'm just little me. I make all kinds of dumb things. I made this too. I don't know if it's good or not. And what I do know is that if I stop working on it, it'll go away. If I stop creating it, it'll vanish. But God isn't like that. Nirvana isn't like that. Enlightenment isn't like that. But this is that. This romantic love is sacred in that way. And so I want some kind of romantic love. I want some love in my life that I don't build, that I don't create, that I don't work on, that doesn't depend on my efforts and intentions in order to simply exist. I was mentioning this to my my mother, and she associated this then with happiness. Naturally, there's a kind of happiness that is independent of conditions, that is not created and is not destroyed. Of course, that's the case. But conditional happiness, the kind of happiness that most of us think of as happiness, the thing that most of us mean when we say the word happiness, that is created and is destroyed. That is not permanent. We work on it and we get some of it, and then we stop working on it and it goes away, or even if we're working on it, conditions change and it goes away anyway. And my mother is saying it's useful for us, it's mature of us to consider happiness to be something that doesn't just arrive out of the sky for us. It's something that we work on, that we create. And in fact, sorry, I'm going to use a strong statement that you said, but I think it's worth saying something this sharp. In fact, it's not even something that we inherently deserve. Isn't that what you said?
I did.
It's not that happiness isn't something that we deserve to have. It's something that we earn. It's something that we work on. It's something that we produce through skill. And if we don't have those skills, we won't get it. Even if we want it. And even if we have those skills and we don't work on it, we won't get it. It's like other things. I was, again, talking with Jay, fascinating conversation, and one of the things that he said was that he brought someone to his family. They met his family. And his family, most of the couples in your family are in arranged marriages. And we think of a love marriage as being, as I say, perhaps the point of life and the solution to all of my problems. And we think, well, that's going to be great. I'm going to be in a relationship with someone. It's going to be super, and we're going to be nice to each other, understand each other, and get along. And all the other problems in my life will sort of fade away, and it's going to be fantastic. And he brought someone to meet his family, and they met all these couples who were in arranged marriages, and they were really sweet to each other, really nice to each other, really caring for each other. And the person said, and said to Jay, what are the chances? What's the likelihood that would happen? That these people would be in arrangements and they'd still be so good to each other? So strange, isn't it? That's because we don't see this as a skill. It would be similar to, as many of you know, I like to ski. Cross-country skiing is favorite thing to do in the world. Not my favorite thing to do, but my favorite thing to do in the world. And and it's like saying, wow, you ski a lot and you're really good at it. What are the chances? It's so lucky. It's really working out for you. That you're so good at this thing that you work on. So we look at relationships as if they're magic versus skill. I actually think that they're the opposite of magic. They're not magic. And again, sorry to bring up so much in this conversation. I hope you're enjoying all the self-conscious awareness.
No, I am.
But the thing he said that I thought was so great was that, the fact is that a few years into any relationship, even a love marriage, a few years in, everyone's in an arranged marriage. everyone is suddenly married to someone they don't know and didn't choose. It's just always that way. So it's kind of funny, you know. We may think we're getting out of it, but we're continually discovering that this person is someone we don't understand, agree with, like. And the question then arises, how do we deal with that? How do we respond to that phenomenon? What happens then for us? And it's relevant to this path. It is just like mindfulness, just like meditation. We have the impression that it's going to be magic. We hope it will be magic. And one of the things that I feel most concerned about in meditation is that those of us, like myself, who happen to have a magical experience early on, tend to be the ones who keep practicing. And that's terrible. Because whether you happen to have a magical experience early on has no correlation to whether you should continue to practice. None. It's true. I did a sit for the first time for 20 minutes. I hated it. It was really difficult. I left. I went on a walk. And after a little while on that walk, I had a very significant experience. And I decided to go join a monastery. But when I tell the story, I like to tell it this way, because it's a better story, even though people don't like it. And so I don't do it this way. But if I could just tell the story the way I want to, I was just talking to myself in the mirror, rather than giving talks to other people, I give the talk this way. And literally, actually, when I review the experience in my own mind, I review it in this way. Well, I went to do this meditation thing that I didn't understand or know anything about, never read a book about it, didn't know what it was. I got poor instruction from a magnificent person, and it was terrible. And so I kept practicing for the rest of my life. That's a good story. That's a fantastic way to tell the story. It's a worse story if I add in, it was a terrible experience, and then I had a wonderful experience, and I kept practicing for the rest of my life. That is, let me be clear, why is it a worse story? Because it makes me wrong. It makes me into an obviously shallow person. I am better if I tell, it's an egotistical thing. I am better if the story is it was terrible and I kept practicing forever. It was great and I kept practicing forever. It's just, okay, that's fine. Easter's coming up and I don't get to give my Easter talk this year because we're having did you talk about it? Okay, well, you'll hear. It's exciting. So I'll give a quick Easter bit, a quick quote from Jesus of Nazareth. Who was a very, very interesting spiritual teacher who was a predecessor to the creation of the religion that we think of as Christianity. Christianity is in many ways based on his teachings. And he said something very interesting to his apostle Thomas. And what do we call Thomas? Doubting Thomas, that's right. So Thomas, a very fascinating individual, had a great influence on especially, strangely Hinduism, because that form of Christianity, you could say flourished or at least subsisted in India, in the West. He wanted to see the holes in Jesus' hands, sort of. Probably actually his wrists, but he wanted to see the holes that the nails made when Jesus was crucified, to believe that this was really his master who had risen from the dead. And Jesus said, blessed or happy are those who have not seen and yet believe. Beautiful statement which has been sadly misinterpreted terribly over the centuries to advising what we now call blind faith. That's not the point. Thomas was very deep. Thomas was an incredible person. And now we say doubting Thomas in this insulting way, sometimes to each other. That's not what was happening. You won't see. Ever. That's the point of the story. That's why it says, happy are those who have not seen and yet believe. You're never going to see nirvana. Nirvana isn't perceived with your eyes. You're never going to hear God. You don't hear God with your ears. It doesn't work that way. That which isn't created or destroyed isn't found through our senses that are continually aware of the phenomena that come and go. That's what they're designed to do, and that's what they do, and they do a fine job at it. But if we become attached to that which is created and destroyed, and refer to it as that which is not created and destroyed, suffering is guaranteed. That is deep ignorance that will infect and suffuse our lives and cause us to behave in ways that are irrational, illogical, selfish, hateful, delusional. It is possible, of course, to use that which is created and destroyed to transcend that which is created and destroyed. And a romantic relationship, as in any activity that we engage in, that ought to be the goal. We can use the relationship to transcend the relationship. Same way that we would use our breath to transcend our breath if we're, for example, focusing on our breath in meditation. Use thinking to transcend thinking. We're using thinking as the object of meditation. It's possible to do that, and we can do that, and that's the significance of romantic relationships. And that takes work. It just does. It takes work. It's hard. And so the first question for us to ask if we're interested in getting involved in a created phenomenon, such as a romantic relationship, is, are we up for that work? Are we up for that? And if the answer is no, great. That's fantastic. Be celibate. I've been celibate. I have spent most, I'd say, of my adult life celibate, and it's great. It's fantastic. You should try it. You know, if you can, if you're free to do so, which I understand many people here aren't, but if you're free to do so, try it for a long time. 5, 10 years. Because it's very useful to absolutely confirm that the story we've been told is wrong. You do not need a romantic relationship to be happy. And a romantic relationship is not the point of your life. And you can confirm that without a doubt if you make that choice and stick with it. If you feel that you're up for it, if you feel that this relationship is indeed an important part of your vow, as we say, of your, you might say, calling. If that's the case, then you have to be ready to be with someone you don't know, didn't choose, disagree with, and that every moment of it, whether you're agreeing or disagreeing, things are easy or hard, all of it is a constant striving to allow, a striving to directly encounter that in you and in them that is not created or destroyed, that was not born, that will not die. So, now I'll finish with that. Now I'll finish with a practical. That may have been very inspiring. Well, good news. This won't be. So I was asked last week a very good question, and I appreciate that you asked it, and I'm going to do my little best to respond to it in a helpful way. I was asked, okay, thank you very much, but how do you choose this person anyway? Right? Thanks for the theory, but come on. When it comes down to it, how do you choose the person? So I'll give advice now, but I should say that advice is hard to give well. So it's up to each of us to work this out. But since I was asked, I'll tell you what I can. So, 3 things. First thing, if you're really going to try to build a life with the person, then what you're trying to build is a vow with the person. You're trying to bring forth your vow and theirs for the benefit of the world. That means that you need someone who can do that. There are basic competencies that each of us will need. Just competencies. Simple stuff. You know? Simple stuff. And when I say simple stuff, I mean the simple stuff. Like, did you do the dishes? Stuff like that matters when it comes to your vow. And you can say, no, I don't want it to matter. Well, it matters. It matters more than you may think. And when people get frustrated around things like dishes and, shoveling the snow and such, there's a reason for that. It's significant because every bit of that needs to be part of your vow. Every bit of it. All day long, everything we do needs to be part of our vow, or else it isn't our vow. So if we start downplaying the significance of those aspects of our lives, then we're downplaying the significance of our lives. They say, chop wood, carry water. You brought that up last week. That really matters. You need someone who can do those things, even if in modern technological age, you don't actually chop wood or carry water. You do things like that, and so that's the first thing. Choose someone who can do those things to fit the vow that you profess. Second thing, choose someone who's honest. Choose someone who's really honest. That means that they tell you the truth. It means that when they say they'll do something, they do it. But even more important than that, the thing that's most important to look out for is someone who's able to be honest with themselves. And that is hard to find. If you can find someone who has these basic competencies regarding your personal vow and is able to be honest with you and themselves, you might want to just marry them right away. Because you're not going to find that many such people. There aren't very many of us who have done the hard work that's needed to be capable of those 2 things. And I haven't gotten to the third one yet. But just those 2 things are very, very hard. Well, how about the third one? The third one is choose someone who's kind. So choose someone who's competent in certain ways, who's honest, and who's kind. And kind means that first, you are never unsafe around them, physically or emotionally. They do not treat you in abusive or neglectful ways, physically, emotionally, or otherwise. They understand that you have needs, that you deserve to be cared for. Their goal is to lift you up, and they enjoy lifting you up. They enjoy making you happy. It's not that you have to beg for it and then they're willing to do it. It's that they're actually proactive about it. Cameron isn't here, but Cameron is our new executive director starting a few months ago. And just yesterday, we had our first board meeting with him as the executive director, and we really put him through it. We gave him a hard time, and I give him a hard time. You know me, I give people a hard time. And he did a great job. First board meeting. Really good for one's first board meeting. And it was wonderful. And I knew that I was going to give him a hard time. And so I spent most of the day prodding, pushing all of the residents to support him. Give him the food he likes. Give him a massage. Tell him how much you love him. Tell him how much you appreciate him. Because he's making your life possible right now. And he's about to get grilled. And you need to be sure that he's ready for that and that he knows that when he gets out of that, whatever happens, you're going to be there for him. That if he ends up being in crisis, that means that he can go to you, every one of you. And you're going to sacrifice in order to be sure that he is cared for. That's the deal. That's how it has to be. And if you don't do that, I can't do my job, which is to grill him, because I'm the chair of the board. I'm his boss. And I have to find out how he's doing. And so I asked the residents, well, what are you going to do? And they said, well, if Cameron needs, they told Cameron, if you need our help, then ask and we'll give it to you. And as I say, sometimes I'm hard on people, and I was hard on the residents for saying that. I said, that isn't good enough. That is not caring for someone. To be willing to do what they ask you to do? What? That's not love. It means that you're actually proactive about it. You wonder. You ask yourself, you're looking at someone all the time, you're wondering, what do they like? And you spend all your time living. People have lived with him for months now. You should know what he likes. And you should be constantly looking for your chance to give it to him. Of course, it's not always possible. But this is what I mean when I say kindness. Of course, at the very least, you're safe. You're not abused or neglected. Okay, fine. At least it's that. But more than that, you're looking for someone who is fed by caring for you. Okay, so those are the three things. Competent, honest, kind. But there's actually something else. There are three things, but here's a fourth. And the fourth one is the most important one. But there are really only three things. This is the fourth one. The question isn't actually if they have the qualities of competence, honesty, and kindness. The question is, are they willing to do the work required to gain those skills? Because you're not going to meet someone. Remember I said if you meet someone with these two things, then they're going to be great, you should marry them right away? Well, let me just break this to you. You're not going to find anyone who has all three of those characteristics. You're not. You will not find anyone who is competent, honest, and kind in the way that I am referring to. There aren't such people. That's the deal. Face it. But what you can find is someone who doesn't have those skills and is willing to work hard at building them. And then they'll work hard and fail and die. And you will work hard and fail and die. And that is beautiful. That is beautiful. That's love. That's a kind of love that unifies that which is created and destroyed and that which is not created or destroyed. That's the path that leads to freedom. That hard work done together. Take a moment to find a comfortable posture that represents both relaxation and alertness. And in that posture, bring your attention to your breath. Each breath coming and going. And attend to that coming and going, that birth and death of each breath. technique is simply to maintain an alert, relaxed posture while attending to the arising and passing away of each breath. Once again, the technique is while maintaining comfortable, upright posture, remain mindful of the inhale and exhale, the coming and going of each breath. When you're inhaling, know that you're inhaling. When you're exhaling, know that you're exhaling. The exercise is very simple. The significance of it is to be able to stay with your breath, breath after breath. In daily life, our focus space is changing with great frequency, but here the focus space stays the same. This particular exercise, the focus space stays the same. When inhaling, attend to the inhale. When exhaling, attend to the exhale. Mindfulness of breathing. Strive to maintain mindfulness of breathing. I'll ring the bell in a moment. We'll have about 3 minutes to move around. Please continue to practice if you choose to get up and move around. Even while you walk or get some water or use the restroom, it's possible to continue to attend to the coming and going of each breath. Continue to strive to attend to the coming and going of each breath. And we'll use this practice to explore two kinds of happiness, two kinds of enjoyment that are the foundation of successful relationships. The first is the enjoyment that we gain from sacrifice, from not having what we want. As we attend to our breath, distractions, things that we call distractions, may arise. Distractions are the things that we would prefer to pay attention to, rather than paying attention to our breathing. A thought comes up and we want to think it. Maybe it's pleasant, maybe it's painful, but in any case, we want to attend to the thought rather than to the breath. A body sensation arises. I want to attend to that rather than to the breath. Whether it's pleasant or painful, we're attracted to that. To set that aside and not pay attention to what we want to pay attention to is sacrifice. The skill of sacrifice is fundamental to a successful relationship because we often have to set aside what we want. And it's essential that we find happiness, fulfillment, enjoyment in that very act. Notice as you set those thoughts aside that it's mysteriously fulfilling. It's fun. There's a freedom, a magnificence in not attending to what we want to attend to. Apart from the enjoyment that we gain from attending to the rich, alive feeling of breathing. Simply setting aside what we are attached to is inherently fulfilling. But again, this requires work. It requires exploration and time to find this flavor of happiness, this type of happiness. So take this time. Each time there's a distraction, pulling your attention away, practice bringing your attention back to your breath. But at that time, notice in particular what is fulfilling about sacrificing the desire to pay attention to the distraction. good. And to finish, we'll attend to another kind of pleasure, another kind of enjoyment, fulfillment, gratification. That's essential for a successful relationship. That we practice in particular as we meditate. That is learning to enjoy the striving, learning to enjoy the hard work in its own right of itself. And so as you attend to your breathing, notice the significance of striving. Sometimes distractions may arise. We failed, you could say, to attend to our breath, and now we need to work to bring our attention back. As you bring your attention back, notice, deeply experience the enjoyment that comes from that hard work, the fulfillment that comes from striving. Make that the point. That is the most important thing to experience, and you're using focus on your breath simply in order to create the arena in which you can strive to bring your attention to something. Use your breath as that something and notice the flavor, particular type of enjoyment that comes from that hard work. I wouldn't recommend trying to imagine this. Do the work, and in that moment, notice, as if out of the corner of your eye, the happiness that comes from that work. Now you may successfully bring your attention to your breath. You may continue to be distracted. But the purpose of this particular exercise is to soak up, to drench your body in the fulfillment that comes from the hard work of controlling our minds, of cultivating our minds. ahead if you'd like.
I noticed, kind of like, in a way, it was like my breath was like the last thing that I wanted to pay attention to. But there was a kind of subtle joy. It wasn't like a really exhilarating thing. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Sensation.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, I don't know if everyone could hear that, so I'll repeat it. You didn't really want to pay attention to your breath. It was actually the last thing you wanted to pay attention to. And yet, as you brought your attention to it, there was a certain kind of pleasure. It wasn't an exhilarating joy, but you found something, even though it was subtle. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a good time to quote the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. I won't have a chance to do that next week. On Easter, most important day of the Christian year. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Yes? It's the smallest of seeds, but it grows into the largest of herbs. It grows into a very big plant. It's a very small seed. Or as Shinzen says, subtle is significant. We often do want a big experience. And it isn't that the experience isn't big. It's that the way that happens is that you find something small and subtle, the appropriate thing. Of course, it can't just be a piece of sand or something, a piece of salt. It has to be a seed, a mustard seed. And then you plant it and you care for it, and it grows and grows into something larger than you thought could have come from such a small seed. It's just the same thing with our practice. We gain a kind of fulfillment, and we learn to stay with that even though it seems small. And if it's the right one, it grows and grows beyond our imagination, beyond what we believe it could grow to. So, I'd recommend that you stay with that and you attend to it. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
In your talk today, I was just thinking, as far as relationships go, I mean, I'm in a 20-year relationship, but I never really had those feelings that you say that, our relationship was the end-all, be-all, and this and that. But I wonder if it has to do with the fact that I'm a lesbian, and that culture really didn't support that. And so, you just didn't have the same experience,
Because you weren't taught to believe that it would be the end-all, be-all, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, that was really for a man and a woman,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was, born in the 50s and basically, grew up not thinking, but being told that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew who I was, but that meant, according to other people that, none of that was available. So I never even thought about that stuff. I mean, I never thought I'd see in my lifetime that I could be married,
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't equate all those things the same way,
And what's your experience of that? Does that seem helpful?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because I don't know. Because when I look at myself and not having that, I don't know. It's because I'm thinking about last week and this week. There's so much in there, in all that, that you talked about. On one hand, you're not, supposed to be looking at it as, something divine, but on the other hand, you're supposed to be looking at that person that you're in a relationship as divine, so there's all these, subtleties. And I kind of look at it like, since I didn't have that same experience of looking at relationships in that way, as I look through my life, I look at immature relationship, little more mature, and I feel like all those relationships led me to a healthy relationship where two people are working, and I know that I can be by myself. I've been by myself, my partner knows she can be by herself, by no means I'm saying I'm in some perfect relationship, but I guess I always thought, that relationships, if they were going to be successful, that you had to work at them. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's, seeing my parents and other people, struggle at things, and it's the vow that you make in a mature relationship compared to one that you make in a immature one, at least in my life, are very different. When you walk in with some experience, and I think it was, I remember reading, I think it was, what's her name, Sylvia
Bornstein.
Yeah. Talking about the difference between lust and love, and and I think lust is something that can, happen, obviously, and start a relationship, but it doesn't sustain a relationship. And I think that's, when I think about sexuality, I think about those things and reading about that, lust is one thing, and that's just totally different. And in most relationships, I think, as people say, oh, there's a honeymoon period, and then things change, and that's why they say love is blind, because it's not really love. It's lust is blind, in a way. And then, lust is gone, and then you're like, oh, holy crap, I married my mother or father, or, whatever. But as you get older and wiser, you see that, you're basically trying to fill some need, and that when you turn that corner and realize I have to work on myself so that I'm not doing that, then I kind of look at, even though, like I say, I've been a partner for 20 years, that every relationship to me is that. Like, my closest people in my life, if they're not willing to work, it's not going to be a deep relationship, And some friends in Syracuse, we were sitting around a couple of weeks ago, and since we lived there for 15 years, they're like, boy, we really miss having this kind of deep discussion where you can be honest, and where you can challenge each other and say, hey, that hurt my feelings, and to a lot of the world that is so foreign, but communication and like you said, honesty is just so important. So when it comes down to it, in a way, all relationships are the same in a way. Even though it's really nice to go through life with someone and have that. And I figure, and this is referring to something that you talked about last week, that we're actually hindering the speed with which we're moving towards enlightenment. And I figure, well, I'm not going to get there this lifetime anyway, so what the hell, you know? I mean, I don't care how fast I get there, but it is really nice to have somebody to go through life with. But as long as they're doing the same kind of work, because I think it's when you, and people, friends, everybody, you're kind of going like this. But if all of a sudden somebody's growing more than the other person, I think that's where things break down. So, just thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Which person is growing faster than the other person?
Well, it depends, you know.
Can we turn the lights on? Yes.
Can you unpack the idea that not everybody deserves happiness? I don't necessarily disagree. I know your mom originally said it, but now you own it because you said it. I don't necessarily disagree, but I also don't necessarily agree, and I understand that you refine and cultivate skills and tools to build happiness, but I'm struggling with accepting that not everybody deserves it.
Yeah, so just want to clarify the meaning of the sentence. I don't know that I said not everyone deserves happiness. I would put it the other way. If we're talking about this kind of conditional happiness, then I wouldn't say not everyone deserves happiness. I'd say everyone doesn't deserve happiness. I'd actually put it differently, because everyone's the same in this way. It's not that some people do and some people don't. It's that none of us deserve it. We all create it. We all build it. We make it. And it doesn't happen without that work. If we don't cultivate our minds, we don't cultivate our behaviors, cultivate our relationships, then happiness doesn't come. It doesn't come automatically. This particular kind of happiness, because then there's unconditional happiness as well, which we don't create. But this conditional happiness, which is, as I say, what the entirety of what most of us mean when we say, well, no, I'll go further. When most of us say happiness, we're talking about conditional happiness. And we're not even talking about the higher forms of conditional happiness. So we're talking about very fleeting, shallow kinds of happiness. Most people, when they say this is the happiest I've ever been, they're still talking about a shallow, fleeting form of happiness. There are higher forms that are more fulfilling and less impermanent, let's put it that way, less fleeting. And then there are even higher forms, and yet all of that, if there's a happiness that arises, then it's a happiness that passes away. It's happiness that isn't totally fulfilling. That's what I call conditional happiness. Within that kind of conditional happiness, a happiness that is dependent on conditions, it will not arise if we don't have the skills needed to build it. It always arises because we have created it. It's dependent on creation. Created happiness has to be created. Conditional happiness has to be produced through the confluence of specific conditions, and that can be done through effort, intent, striving, diligence, fortitude. And it's through those qualities that happiness arises. Those qualities are limited, and therefore that happiness is limited. Those skills are limited. We only have a certain amount of energy and skillfulness, and so that happiness is limited. And that way you can say we don't deserve it automatically. We build it, and then you could say we deserve it because we created it. And in that way you could say some people deserve it and some people don't, if you wanted to look at it in that way. But inherently speaking, this is what the Buddha was referring to when he said that everything created is suffering. Everything that's produced, all produced things. Sabba sanskara. The sanskara means things that are put together. Dukkha are unfulfilling. unsatisfactory, not good enough, problematic. That's my interpretation of the statement, that that's how it is. And since it isn't inherently fulfilling, we don't inherently deserve it. It's conditionally fulfilling, and so we produce it through conditions, and that's effort, not something that comes to us automatically. So that it doesn't come automatically is, I think, the significance of this, unlike unconditional happiness. Did I understand what you said correctly, or do you have anything to change or add?
I just would like to thank Julia for asking the question, because it didn't occur to me, though as soon as she asked the question, I saw how easily someone could think, some people don't deserve happiness, but you explicated it very nicely.
Is that enough, or is there more on that?
That's very clarifying. Thanks.
Yes.
Speaking of clarifying, at the end of today's talk, you responded to my question from last week, which was basically, if somebody is reasonably enlightened, how do they go about picking a spouse?
Mm-hmm.
And your response was, my question is, how did you think about that for a week and kind of assemble a response and then later deliver? Or is that response basically part of a universal truth that has been known for hundreds of years and is just called from Buddhist texts or
Both.
elsewhere?
Both. Both are true, and I think you can see how both answers could be true in this case. The formulation of it, yes, that was a week of consideration, but if you look back on other talks I've given, it's all there already. So it also is the case that it's simply how it is. The Buddha was asked this question once by a prince who was well known. Michael gave a talk a few weeks ago about the metaphors that we use to consider our world. Anyone here was at that? Yes. And he mentioned in the description of the talk, I don't know if he mentioned it in the talk itself, the wheel. You're trying to think about the wheel as a metaphor that describes what the path is. What is this path? It's a wheel. It's like a wheel. So the wheel is one part of a chariot, and the chariot. So the wheel is a chakra. Chakra. Nowadays we how do we pronounce it? Chakra. Is that how we say it? Chakra. Sounds better in English than chakra. It's exciting, but it's not so shocking. It's more just chucking. That is the correct pronunciation. So a chakra is a wheel, and it's referring to something called a ratha, which is a chariot. And a war chariot was an extremely important invention for the people who eventually started calling themselves Aryan, who took over a large portion of the Indo-European continent and spread their language group all over the place, and now English also is based on that. So the chariot was very important at the time, and there was a certain prince who was an expert in the construction, the parts of the creation of chariots. And he happened to be the person, it could have been anyone, of course, we all know about something, but he happened to be the person who asked the Buddha the same question. So when people ask you things, you have these great answers, and just wondering, do you think them up on the spot, or do you just already know it? And you have to think it up. You're just going to say, well, I wonder how I should say it. Maybe I'll say it this way, or you just already know it. And the Buddha, as you know, there are 4 kinds of questions in Buddhism. What are they? There are 4 ways of answering a question. The first is you answer it directly. The second is you answer it through analysis. I think some of you know this. The third is you ask it a question in return. You answer it with a further question. And then the fourth, of course, is my favorite.
Say nothing.
Some questions are not to be answered. Just because you say nothing doesn't mean you don't answer.
That's true.
But sometimes you don't answer. So he answered this question with a question. And he said, you are an expert in the construction of chariots, are you not? And the prince said, yes. And he said, well, if someone were to come up to you and show you a chariot and say, what is this part and how is this part made? Would you think up the answer on the spot, or do you just already know it? And he said, well, of course I already know it, but I have to say it to this person in a certain way. I have to teach them. And in that way, it's on the spot. But another way, it's just how it is. And the Buddha said it's just the same. Once you understand the Dharma, it's just the same as a chariot. I think it's a very useful metaphor.
Yeah. So if I had done my own research, I eventually would have come up with the same 3.1 attributes that you I mean, it might have taken me a whole lot longer because I would have had to learn the chariot. But I could identify the 3.1 parts required.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'd say yes. Honesty and kindness, those are themes that you're going to find. They are called lots of different things in different traditions, but honesty and kindness are
Universal.
Yeah, you'll find that wherever you look. Wise people have been teaching that all over the world for a long time. If you consider competence, that also it's taken in a lot of different ways. It's looked at in a lot of different ways. But you can find it. I'd say that one's a little bit harder to pinpoint in terms of spiritual traditions as a single theme. And then the hard work, that actually, of course, it's very important, and you hear people talking about the importance of hard work all the time, but that was more set up for this talk. That was my way of bringing this talk together. So it was a theme that was relevant to the specific aspect of relationships that I was talking about today. And of course, it is universal, but I set it up that way as more of a style of pedagogy than ontology. Does that make sense?
It almost
Or
suggests,
even more pedagogy than taxonomy, actually.
it almost suggests that these characteristics are ideals for anybody. And
Right.
So looking for a spouse
Right.
really isn't much different than looking for a roommate or looking for a
Exactly, and this brings us back to your previous comment, which is this talk, my goal in this talk, and those of you who I talked about it with know, my goal was actually to use this talk to take us back out of specifically romantic relationships and bring us to principles that apply to all relationships. So I'm glad that worked.
Once again, using romantic love as a condiment.
Right, exactly. We did it. Exactly. Good. Yes.
As you were describing the necessary components to have a romantic relationship that could allow both participants to fulfill their vow, I realized that I feel like I'm getting all of that from our monastic community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's any major differences you see between the relationships that we share, like the willingness to go to uncomfortable places
Mm-hmm.
and not leave, and the connection in a romantic relationship.
celibacy.
That's definitely one
Difference.
difference.
It's an important difference.
Do you
It is. I appreciate that you say it. It's actually a highly significant difference, and it's worth just saying and giving it some weight. So the introduction of sexual encounters, in particular sexual intercourse, is a big change. Something different happens with that. I'm not going to get into that in the next few minutes, but it's huge, of course, as you know. It's an enormous change. It contains a lot of power. So that's a difference. But is that the direction that you're looking for with your question?
My impression was that there is, besides that, it just doesn't seem like there is a difference. Or maybe,
Right.
or maybe just it felt like what you were describing was exactly the sort of
Relationships
nourishment and relationships present.
that we have.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I come from a certain tradition, and I think that tradition is good. Otherwise, I wouldn't come from it. Okay? So with that disclaimer, that was a disclaimer for information. And studies show also, and the other scientific tradition also would support that a big difference is that in the circumstances that we're living in and the relationships that we're forming, actually achieving what I described is easier and more common than in romantic relationships. Being in a romantic relationship seems to make what I'm describing more difficult to achieve. And I'll let all of you decide what you think about that. Maybe that means you shouldn't be in them. Maybe it's more challenging, so it's even more productive. Everyone can come up with their own personal interpretations, but I'd say that there's a lot of evidence that being in a romantic relationship, in particular a sexual relationship, makes it very difficult to maintain honesty and kindness with the partner. Different from friendship. And certainly different from spiritual friendship. So, there you are.
Spiritual friendship.
The kind of friendship that we have there, it's you intentionally set up a relationship in which you're explicitly supporting each other's psychological, emotional, spiritual growth. That's the explicit purpose. Of course, that can be true, but it's different when you make that explicit, and when everyone agrees that that's the point of the relationship explicitly. It's not that doesn't happen in other cases, but something different happens when it's made explicit. And so for us, it's made explicit. It's totally explicit. From the very beginning to the very end of the relationship and throughout. That's Kalyana Mitra. That's a beautiful term in Sanskrit. Kalyana Mitra. That's a term for this. And it's significant that in that language they have an actual term for this kind of relationship, which we don't really have. We try to say spiritual friendship, and then you say, what does that? No one even knows what it means. Significant that there is such a word. And it's not just a repurposing of another word like brother or sister, which is often used. And that, or repurposing as in this Quaker tradition of the word friend, an attempt to redefine the word friend as that. But it's different if you actually have a specific term because it's taken to be that important in everyone's life. All right, have to stop there.